I come to the garden alone, while the dew is still on the roses, and the voice I hear falling on my ear, the Son of God discloses. This is the opening verse of a hymn known by many, written in, published in 1912 by American songwriter C. Austin Miles. The references are to incidents in the Gospel of John. It speaks of gardens as places where people make spiritual contact. But this spiritual contact is much more than quotes from John's Gospel or even the Christian tradition. Many people of varied spiritual traditions find in the gardens experiences of awe and wonder. To lead us in an exploration of gardens and spirituality, we welcome Patricia Moore, steward of the Quiet Garden Kent Lodge in Wolfville, and Melanie Priesnitz, head gardener of the Harriet Irvin Botanical Gardens at Acadia University. Thanks for accepting the invitation, Pat and Melody. So I'll start by asking you both to tell us something about yourselves and what it is that has attracted you to gardens and gardening.
I'll start, Pat. So I came 23 years ago to Nova Scotia from the corporate world of Toronto, which was a very different world. I was working in a skyscraper on the 67th floor, and it was an environment where I felt like I couldn't breathe. I didn't know what I was missing, but I knew I was missing something. So I left that world and I moved to Nova Scotia, just wanting to find myself and to get outside, to connect with nature in a way that I wasn't able to in the city. And I fell into this wonderful position at Acadia University at the Harriet Irving Botanical Gardens when we were planting the garden. So I spent 2 years planting the 6-acre garden, and the garden and I have really grown together over these last 23 years. We've learned so much together. We've nurtured each other in this experience. And I think that for me, gardening is a really spiritual experience. It is the time where I can just connect with something bigger, something greater than myself. I can listen to what's happening in the natural world, what's happening around me. Often I can just turn my brain off and do nothing other than the tasks of gardening, of pulling weeds from the earth, of deadheading roses, of planting in the soil. And it's been very, very therapeutic for me. It's been a wonderful experience. So that's who I am now in this place, the caretaker of this wonderful 6-acre garden. And it is where my soul gets fed, in this garden, in this soil.
And I was not a gardener, but I fell in love with the gardener. And at the time that we met, I was really a botanist. And when he discovered that I could do field work all right, we came together. And I never was a gardener, but wherever we lived, Reg planted a garden, and I said, I will cook anything you grow in the garden. So we had a very compatible relationship. I admired the garden. And when we moved to Kent Lodge, it was covered in the hairy dandelions, and it did have wonderful peonies that we still have. But Reg is the one who developed the garden, hand dug the sunken gardens, built a berm so that we're one zone warmer than the rest around us, and we don't get that wind off the dikes. And over the years, Reg had told me when he was a boy, his godfather was a gardener on an estate. And Reg spent a lot of time with him, and he thought, if I can't be a geologist, I will work on an estate. Well, he did go to university, became a professor of geology, but in the back of his mind was always, at some point in his life, he would be a gardener. So he worked at it, and when he retired, and it was fortunate, he got an early retirement that worked to his benefit, and he took a short course with Heather Robinson at Acadia, and the people from Blomidon Inn were there, and one of the suggested activities was to make a map of the garden. Well, Reg was a geological map maker. He made this wonderful map, and I went just to accompany him, but I was so impressed that he called it a philosophic garden, and that's what it is, and that's what he had in mind. So from there, we developed an open garden that anyone in the neighborhood or afar could walk through, and we developed commissions for sculptures from young artists in Nova Scotia. So we have a map of that so that when people come through, they can get some indication of what's there. But that's how the garden grew. And when he died, I continued the application to become part of the Quiet Garden Trust that's centered in England and is primarily an Anglican trust, but it's open to everyone, and you'll find them in hospitals, in schools, private homes. And we were the first one in Eastern Canada, and it's spreading across. And
yeah, and the mission of that is really just for a quiet place for contemplation and for meditation in the garden. And it's a beautiful mission.
And it should be open to everyone. So ours garden's open sunrise to sunset. And we have a variety of clientele. My favorites are the daycare children who come, because over the years they've become very knowledgeable about where the sculpture of Grandpa is sitting under a toadstool with his long beard and his toes up. Yeah, and we get a lot of tourists because Google put us on the map, and a lot of local people come and check it from season to season. Yeah.
Could you say something more about your late husband, Reginald Moore?
Oh, absolute eccentric. Had a Father Abraham beard, and everyone would toot going by when he was out gardening. And he wouldn't have a clue who they were, but everyone knew who Reg was. Yeah, he was known, and he would stop, and I was always amazed he got so much done because he would talk to the people, unlike his wife who would stay in the house and look out. Yeah, and he died about 9 years ago, and since then the garden's not quite the same, but I've had an interesting time getting people to work in the garden. And right now I have a delightful young fellow from the high school who's just come, and it will be wonderful to see him become knowledgeable about the plants. So it's been a good activity for me.
And I think it's a nice way that Reg's spirit lives on in the
Oh,
garden, and I think your family feels that.
Oh,
And I feel that.
absolutely.
I had the honor of working. I would take vacation days from Acadia and work with Reg in the garden, and we would sit, and it was such a beautiful vacation day for me. You know, it's what I do here. I garden here, but I gardened there on my vacation because, you know, it's different sometimes when you're at work and in a garden, and I get a lot out of this garden that I'm the caretaker for, but I got even more out of that garden, and I was able to work alongside Reg, and we would sit, and sometimes we would just listen to the birds and listen to the leaves moving and listen to the water in Pat's pond, and sometimes he would tell me wonderful stories of his travels and his tales, and that was really a really beautiful experience for me, that mentorship in the garden. You know, the gardens itself give us so much, and we learn so much from the earth and from being a caretaker of the earth. And when you're lucky enough to also have that experience where I could to look to Reg to be a mentor in the garden, it was a pretty special experience, and I feel close to Reg when I go to the garden still. And I also visit that beautiful little statue of Reg in the garden under the toadstool with his big white beard, and it's it's a very sacred space for me, and I'm so happy that we've able to turn it into this quiet garden that's open to the community, open to Acadia students, open to anyone to come and sit and walk the garden. You know, walking meditation is a beautiful thing to do, and there's wonderful garden paths, cobblestone paths all through the garden that you can wander through. It's a special, special place in Wolfville.
Yeah.
So it sounds as if Reg was the quintessential educator, whether it was lecturing at Acadia or informally sharing his knowledge, mentoring others, and Pat obviously is keeping the tradition going with the daycare and the high school students and anybody else who will come through.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and also started a scholarship program for young horticulture students through the Nova Scotia Community College, which is wonderful. So giving students an opportunity to study horticulture and to learn and to learn more about the passion of gardening as a career.
Oh, wonderful. So could you please share with us a little bit? I think we've got the history of the Quiet Garden, but perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about the history of the Harriet Irving Botanical Garden.
Absolutely, yeah. So as I said, it's a 6-acre botanical garden right on the campus of Acadia University. So we're right here in a relatively urban setting in rural Nova Scotia. You know, we're right on campus. We're the heart of campus. And what the garden is 6 acres of wilderness. You know, we started 23 years ago by doing a full soil excavation. We brought in soil specific to Nova Scotia native habitats. So all of the plants that are in the garden are native to the Wabanaki forest, which means the land of the dawn, where the sun first rises here is where we are. And so we've brought in over 17,000 individual indigenous plants to this land. And we have brought in things like rotten logs and stones with moss on them. And really what we're doing is recreating ecosystems. So it gives people in this area, it gives Acadia students and elderly people in the community that aren't able to get out to the Wabanaki forest as a whole, this accessibility right on campus. So we have 6 acres of relatively accessible flat walking trails that people can get out to. And this is a wonderful space for, again, the same as the Quiet Garden, for quiet contemplation, for a walking meditation, also for just sitting and listening to the sound. We have a stream that moves through the forest. We have a marsh. The spring peepers are beautiful in early spring, listening to the tree frogs. It's a real place where you can disconnect from this technological world that we're in right now and come back to nature and find yourself. And I think that's so important. We don't do enough of that as a society and as people. You know, we are human beings. We're not human doings, but we're always doing things, right? We so overprogram ourselves and our children. And the garden gives us this really beautiful opportunity to just take a deep breath, slow down. You know, I think that anyone that walks into a garden feels that, you know, you lower your blood pressure as soon as you step in, whether it's the Quiet Garden or your garden at home or the Harriet Irving Garden here. So it really creates that for campus. You know, it's Acadia's backyard, and we really encourage newcomers and students that are here, community members, to use that space. It is open to everyone, and it's a really valuable tool that is always accessible.
Okay. And who was Harriet Irving?
Yeah, so Harriet Irving was the mother of Arthur Irving. Arthur Irving was the Chancellor of Acadia for many years and is a dear friend to Acadia still. So Harriet was a woman who loved young people, and she loved wildflowers. So that's why it was so important to the family to have a wildflower garden, so all native plants to this area. You know, we tend to take for granted what we have in our own backyards as humans, and when you put these beautiful native plants in a botanical garden, in a formal setting, we put tags on them, we name them, we get to know their names, we have a much greater appreciation for them. So that's a really key part of us, is teaching young people, teaching society about plant conservation and about conserving these beautiful and honoring and treasuring these beautiful plants that we have. You know, plants give us so many things. They give us the air that we breathe. They give us oxygen. You know, we can't breathe out, they breathe out what we breathe in. We can't breathe without plants. We can't live on this little green and blue planet without them, but we take them for granted. You know, they give us food, they give us medicine, they give us shelter. So many gifts. What do we give back to plants? Well, as gardeners and as caretakers, we can give back to plants. You know, there's so much that we can do, and that reciprocity that as a gardener, as a caretaker of the land, that we can involve ourselves with is a really powerful thing. You know, giving back, helping to plant for pollinators, planting for the planet, planting for the environment. And that's really what our garden is about. It's a conservation garden of valuing plants and valuing what's in our backyard more than we tend to as humans.
So I wonder if you could share with me some stories. How have the visitors to the Quiet Garden and to the Harriet Irving Garden nurtured their spirituality in these gardens? Just give us a taste.
Do you want to go first, Pam?
Well, even before Reg died, we had sponsored a retreat in the garden. And it's been interesting over the years to see, I've continued to do that, and we've had a wide variety of presenters, and each one brings something unique to the garden. And it's filled a need, I think, especially with women and older women who have found the gathering together and the sharing of wisdom that I think has been a really good experience for me to say, yes, it's worthwhile to do this. And I've had wonderful support from the community. Melanie has helped, and then I have 3 other people who, one is a grade school teacher now, but he was an arborist, and he comes to make sure it's safe walking through the garden. And I think that this is part of his religious expression. And yeah, I've had one gentleman who I'd known forever. I found him asleep in the garden. And I thought, well, it really must, I'm right on Main Street, so you have all the trucks and everything else. But once you get past the row of shrubs, it's quiet back there.
Yes.
And it was quiet enough for John to take his afternoon nap. And I was so pleased that this showed me a different aspect of the garden. Because a Main Street isn't exactly where you would plan to have a quiet garden, but it worked. It worked.
And perhaps where we need to have a quiet garden because it's so accessible.
I think so.
You know?
I think so. And there's condominium buildings, and there are 2 or 3 apartments, and you find someone just wandering through. And one lady who lived in the triplex used to come and get flowers for her afternoon tea with the ladies. And it gave us pleasure that people felt comfortable, and encouraged kids to take some lilacs to their teacher.
Yes.
Yeah, the things that I think have meaning.
It's a really nice, important reminder that we are really part of the garden. You know, we are animals in the forest. We are part of the garden, and we forget that. We feel like that we're separate from the natural world, right? And the gardens and the Quiet Garden does a really nice job of reminding people and by welcoming people to smell the plants, to pick the plants, to pick the flowers. It's so important to feel connected with our natural world and our environment, and we don't do that enough.
Yes. I'm interested in the sculptures too. Are there any sculptures that have stood out for you or for other visitors who have come in the garden?
Well, yes, because we would go to shows like the Designer Craftsman, and the young fellow, Peter Paraknowitz, took first place with a green man.
Yes.
That I always have had an affinity for the green man. And that was our first purchase. And after that, we got 3 others from Peter over a period of years. So there's from his very young days right through to middle age when he just stopped the stonework altogether. And Reg would commission them so that they could express something that they didn't necessarily think was commercially going to be successful. He and Reg or she, Heather Lawson, was one of our favorites. And when my husband died, in fact, I said to Heather about a tombstone. She said, Reg already picked one out. And it was the birdhouse we had on a column, a limestone. And she moved it to the churchyard.
Wow.
And so Reg's is the birdhouse, and mine is a bee hotel that faces east.
And that is beautiful. That's talking about, as caretakers of the land, that reciprocity even to the end. You know, your tombstones are giving back to the natural world, which is a very beautiful thing.
Yeah. And we have a bench that was the last piece that Heather made before she died. And it's one that will go to the churchyard beside our grave. And it's be still and know that I am God.
Beautiful.
And so we thought it belonged in the garden, but eventually it will go to the churchyard. And some of the other sculptors, one of the McMahons, carved an old butternut tree. And that's St. Bridget with replicas of her miracles of the salmon and the lost sheep. But on the back is the horned man to let us know that we have 2 sides to us.
Wow.
And there are, the map tells something about each of the artists. We hope that we would tell them, you can send anyone in to see it, and then they might commission other things.
Yes.
Yeah.
And some of this information is on the website.
Yes, and we had a map made up by the young woman who used to work here at the garden.
Adrian.
And she contacted every one of the artists and what they wanted.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of them is a woman who used to do these wonderful copper that were well patinated. Mine is a lady slipper, but she had to give it up because of the chemicals. And that one to me is always a very sad one because she did lovely work. Yeah.
Yeah. So the other thing that you and Reg were doing, actually supporting local artists and craftspeople, and that's just so important.
And our house is a heritage property, so there's only so much you could do in the front. But as soon as you got the shrubs and the cedars over here, we could have the modern art and support modern artists.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
That's wonderful. So, Melanie, what has touched people in the garden? And I think there's a little link with the chapel along the way too. So you want to tell us some ways in which students and faculty, staff, members of the community have engaged with the Harriet Irving Botanical Garden to nurture their spirituality?
Yeah, absolutely. There's, it's, as I said, it's this space that really asks for quiet and contemplation and respect. It also is a place for fun and for laughter and for joy. We have the local elementary school kids after school program that comes through very often. We have the daycare program that comes through every day, and it's just so amazing to watch these kids get transformed, and they just love running through the forest, through the garden, and it's a really lovely experience to hear that laughter in the garden. We have, it's hard not to walk through and feel that you are connected with something. You're never alone in the garden. You're always with our friends, the trees and the shrubs and the chickadees and the crickets. Some of them have been joining us on this interview in this space. And so it's a wonderful place to feel very connected to something greater than ourselves. And I think everyone that passes through has that opportunity, whether everyone picks up on that or not. But we do some work to nurture community, Acadia students, and the local community to really tune into that. And some of that would be through, we have meditation walks that take place through the garden, so for walking meditation, or we'll do quiet sitting spot meditation as well, sometimes with children or with adult programs, or through the Acadia Human Resources Department. We'll offer it for faculty and staff as a take a break, take a de-stressor, come to the garden for a walk. We've done some art in the garden programming, which is wonderful, just tuning into another very spiritual experience for some people, another creative side of us. We've had music in the garden. We often have music in the garden and in our garden room. We had one really special service with the chapel choir. We had a late night Chaplain service. It was a candlelight service. Did you go to that, Pat? Were you there? It was beautiful. The Chaplain service, the chapel choir came to our walled garden. There were candles everywhere, and just as the sun was setting, this beautiful, beautiful performance. And that was a really nice opportunity to get outside of our comfort zones a little bit and connect with a dark garden. It's a beautiful, that was a beautiful experience.
Yeah. And I seem to remember some specific work with succulents that you did. I think I got a couple of those succulents. You want to tell us a little bit about
so
that?
Every year, usually twice a year with Acadia students, we have usually it's during a mental health awareness week or chill week, they sometimes call it. It's at a stressful time just before exams. We will we propagate plants here at the Casey Irving Center, succulent plants or spider plants, different house plants that are good for students to take back to their dorms. And we bring students into our potting shed, get them to get their hands dirty, and put down their cell phones and transplant a plant, adopt a plant, we call it, and they bring them back to their rooms, and we just sort of teaching about self-care and plant care. There's so many messages in gardening and in caring for plants and nurturing that we can transfer through to people as well. So that's a wonderful one. We always have a lineup of students. 150 students will come for their plants, and it's a wonderful experience that we have. A nice way to bring students in and bring a little bit of nature into their lives through their spaces, through their dorm rooms or their apartments.
Okay, so that's something else I'm interested in, because lots of people don't have access to a garden. So tell me a little bit more about how you can bring the garden into your space, and maybe a few suggestions of do's and don'ts.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, houseplants are an obvious way, right? And they're becoming much more popular now with young people, which is wonderful to see. It's, you know, plants help us clean the air in our indoor spaces. Spider plants are very, very good at that. So bringing them in, plants are very good at grounding us. You know, they're very good at, if you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling out of sorts, it's really very helpful to touch a living thing, you know, whether it's a rock or a plant or something from the natural world. So if you have that in your room or in your home, that's a wonderful, easy practice that you can do. The smell of plants is a wonderful trigger. You know, there's a lot of work done with therapeutic horticulture and with people that are experiencing memory loss. The smell of plants will bring wonderful memories up for people. Certainly people with Alzheimer's and dementia, it's very, very helpful to trigger memories, or students that are younger people that are having anxiety. So a wonderful thing to ground with plants. You know, one of my favorites here, the lavender, is here, Pat, smell that beautiful plant. It's just such a calming practice.
And we grow lavender at the Quiet Garden, and we give it to L'Arche every year, and they sell it.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, and when we first talked to Bill Martell, who was an Anglican priest, about lavender, because he's the first person we ever knew to grow it here. So we tried, and it had its ups and downs, but it seems to love the driveway where it's hot and dry and it's spread. But you know, when you talk about spider plants and succulents for the students, I don't think you can kill those. And so that's a good choice.
Yeah.
A good choice. They can be forgotten, and they're so forgiving. And I think students need that.
It's really nice to know that there's something relying on you for life, right?
Yeah.
You do need a little bit of nurturing. Every once in a while, you need to give it some water. It's counting on you. And the students often will give them names. They'll name their spider plant Bob, and you know, it becomes a friend. We are never alone in the natural world. We are never alone, and plants are very good at reminding us of this.
Yeah. Well, I want to also give a shout out to the gardeners in Acadia's physical plant department, because every year they plant lavender and roses along the pathway leading up to the chapel. And I always enjoy it. So you're approaching the front entrance of the chapel along this along the path, and the beautiful smells of rose and lavender. I mean, even if you don't go in, just walking along that path and absorbing the smells. They have other plants, it's just beautifully landscaped, but the smells are really wonderful. So thanks to the gardeners from Physical Plant, who every year give us these wonderful smells to accompany our walk into the front door of the chapel.
And there are two places on the campus that our family always looked for. One was the PJM rhododendrons in front of BAC. That was the first one. The second one are the forsythia for graduation. Whether they will be out for graduation or not. And for us, that was always something to be noted. Yeah.
Well, I'd also like to find out from you, how did the coronavirus affect the ways in which gardens were used to nurture spirituality?
Well, it was interesting here at Acadia. So the very first year, we had to shut the doors. We didn't know what was happening, and everyone panicked a little, and so we shut the garden gates, and that was the first time we've ever done that, and that was very, very hard. That was very sad. It was very beautiful. from my perspective, because we had just 4 gardeners that were in that beautiful 6-acre garden, and this amazing thing happened. Nature took over. We had this experience where, normally we have school groups and children and Acadia students and weddings and bonfires, and we have it's always filled with people. The garden had never been so quiet ever since it had been built. Very, very quiet, 4 gardeners during the day, nobody else. It was our little sanctuary. It was a lovely summer. It was strange, but it was lovely. But then we started noticing, we always had one muskrat in the marsh. That summer, they were breeding. They were feeling more and more comfortable. We ended up with 13 muskrats. They ate every last bulrush in the marsh. They were so happy. But it was really soothing and beautiful to know that when the humans step away, Mother Nature will take care of herself. The wildlife was just fine. The plants were just fine. They sorted it out without us, and they carried on. And that was really wonderful for me, who was working through all of that time, to know that it was very grounding and balancing to know there's a lot of chaos in the world, but there's still a lot of beauty. Watch these butterflies landing on the milkweed.
It all will be well. And all will be well.
And all manner of things will be well.
Yes. Right. My mantra.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then the next year we were open to just the Acadia community, and that was wonderful. So we had, I think that the pandemic really brought people outside. We felt safer outside. We felt like that was a safe place to meet and a safe place to communicate with friends and to find community. And so it was the busiest season we've ever had out there. We had philosophy classes on the lawn. We had political science classes outside in the grass, sitting on the lawns. We always have the biology and the earth sciences out there, but we had all of the different disciplines out in the garden, and it was such a beautiful thing. I think it really brought people outside, and it became a much more popular thing to do, was to tend the earth and to just feel that calming bit of nature.
We were never closed because nothing was enclosed and everyone could get away. And I never noticed that we had fewer people. And we have a guest book that people can sign if they want. And I didn't notice any drop there. So people were so coming. Yeah. It was a safe place to be.
Yes. Well, this has been wonderful. I wonder if you have any final thoughts that you want to share as we bring the interview to a close.
Other than, I hope that some family is going to, when I'm not here, is going to live in Kent Lodge and keep the quiet garden going. I really do. I think it makes a difference to my neighborhood.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a beautiful gift for our community.
Yeah.
That space would be missed if it wasn't there. It's a special spot.
Yeah.
And it's, I don't know how many Acadia students find their way down there.
Oh,
do they?
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
More
and
should.
Depending on the year, they'll use it as a shortcut to take. They can come in at the driveway and go across the back and come out because there are gates on either side of the house.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. And yes, and you'll see when parents come to visit in the spring that they'll come through.
That's wonderful. I'm glad.
Yeah.
I'm so glad.
Yeah.
And I just want to thank you for inviting us here. It's such a wonderful thing to be allowed to talk about, to be invited to speak of the spirituality of the garden. And for me, it's just second nature. It is my sanctuary. It is a very spiritual place for me. And I encourage others to look at it in that way. This is this beautiful resource. Both the Quiet Garden and the Harriet Irving Botanical Gardens are right here in Wolfville. You don't need to drive far to get them. You can walk, you can ride your bike to them. I really do encourage the community to use these spaces and to find, we spend so much time programmed and on our phones, and we'll never really be able to find, if you're searching for spirituality, it's very hard to find that if you're constantly having inputs, if you're constantly looking at something, scrolling through something, doing something. You really, if you're searching for your own spirituality and your own connections, you need quiet. You need to just stop what you're doing and look outside and be part of the outside. Be part of nature, and listen within and to the voices that are bigger than us as well. And the garden is a beautiful place to do that.
And I think the garden here has encouraged people to look for open gardens, because in the town of Wolfville it has changed. Red participated many years ago in the open garden that the garden club sponsored here in the area, so it's still on our shed. But I think that there isn't the hesitancy that there used to be. This is private property. Yeah.
It's here for everyone.
Yeah, and I think because people are respectful as well. Yeah.
Well, Pat and Melanie, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation, for reminding us that we're human beings, not human doings, to take the time away to connect with nature that gives us so much, to come to the garden alone or in company, and also to consider bringing a bit of the garden into our homes and into our spaces, even if we can't always be out in the garden. So I hope a way will be found to keep the Harriet Irving Garden going, and also Kent Lodge, the quiet garden, because those are both gifts to the university and to the community. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marjorie. Hope to see you in the garden soon.
I think you will.